and welcome to this section which is going to be focused on the composition scheme under the GST. The composition scheme is going to try and tick off some of the canons of taxation for the indirect tax system. What are canons of taxation? Don't worry, we've got your back covered. We'll be looking into all the 9 canons before moving on to check how the composition scheme nails few of the canons. We'll check out the eligibility criteria to opt into the scheme so you know whether you ought to proceed or not. And then we'll deep dive into all aspects of the composition scheme and give you the factors to take into consideration before deciding to opt into the scheme or not. So let's begin. Now, we know that GST is going to replace and completely transform the current indirect tax system for the better to make it more optimized. But that begs the question, what are the principles that define what an ideal tax system should be? Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, laid down the principles of an ideal tax system, the Canons of Taxation, in his book Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith had proposed 4 canons of taxation and other economists added on to the list, and now we have 9 canons: equality, certainty, convenience, economy, productivity, elasticity, simplicity, diversity, and expediency. Equality, economy, and expediency are related to the monetary aspect of tax collection, the revenue, the cost attached to it, and the requirement of tax. So let's check equality first. Tom falls in the lower middle class category with just sufficient income. Whatever little he can save goes off in taxes. And here is Jeff. He's super rich with a hefty pile of savings, but he's unwilling to pay tax. He pays the same tax as Tom. Well, this isn't fair, right? Under the ideal tax system, tax would be based on a person's ability to pay. The rich pay more tax and the poor pay less, if not nothing. This is the canon of equality. Next, let's move on to the canon of economy. Right in the center, we have the government of India, who collects taxes from all taxpayers like Belay Shop. Jasna and Manoj are typing away at their laptops behind the screen. They and everybody else in the tax department supports the tax collection function. Now, why is the government sad? Because the cost of maintaining the tax department is almost equal to the tax revenue that government collects. This is not economical. This is not the ideal tax system. An ideal tax system is where the cost of collecting taxes or maintaining every other function related to taxation is much lesser than the tax revenue collected. Otherwise, it just doesn't solve any purpose of collecting tax. The logic can be extended to the taxpayer as well. The cost of paying tax should not be higher than what he actually pays. And this is the canon of economy, that the cost of tax should be minimal. Next, let's move on to the canon of expediency. Here's our government. He's busy preparing the budget. He concludes that to meet all of his expenses, he needs 4 lakh crores. And he decides to collect 6 lakh crores instead from the people. This is absolutely unjustifiable taxation. I definitely feel cheated and I absolutely don't want to pay taxes. This is when he realizes his mistake. He should collect only what he requires, 4 lakh crore. Unfortunately, he commits another mistake. He goes and collects all of these 4 lakh crores from the poor people. This defies 2 of the canons, canon of equality as well as expediency. An ideal tax system is where the government can justify the amount of tax it collects and from where it collects. More from the rich and less from the poor. And that is the canon of expediency. Tax should be desirable. Unfair means of taxation are always retaliated by the citizens. So, a fair tax is a desirable tax, and that's the canon of expediency. The next bucket of the canons include certainty, convenience, and simplicity. All three are related to ease and comfort of paying as well as collecting tax. Let's start with the first one, certainty. The citizens of the nation are confused, angry, irritated because they have no idea where to pay taxes, how much to pay taxes, how to pay taxes. The government notices their confusion but chooses to ignore it and not respond. This definitely is a very bad tax structure. An ideal tax system would be where the government brings in certainty of tax payments and procedures to the entire country, that everybody is clear on how much tax they will have to pay, at what point, and how. And that exactly, my friends, is the canon of certainty. Pay how much tax to whom and by what time. Next, moving on to the canon of convenience. Meet Sanya. She looks very happy, but let me tell you, she really isn't. She's about to hire an expert, a tax expert, who's surely going to burn a very big hole in her pocket just because she doesn't understand taxes. She also has to go and install very expensive technology, very expensive systems just to comply with the tax law. She also has to go through a lot of paperwork, which is eating up so much time from her business. After doing all of this, she finally reluctantly goes to pay tax to the government. That's an absolutely horrible system because there's no convenience for the taxpayer to pay tax. An ideal tax structure is where the taxpayer can pay tax by just one click of her mouse. Well, it can't be so simple, but you get the point. It has to be super convenient for the taxpayer, and that's simply the canon of convenience. The next canon is a simple one, the canon of simplicity. Here's Lucy. She completely looks lost because she can't understand literally nothing about the tax law that she ought to comply. She is referring so many books, so many journals. She even browsed through the government's tax site but couldn't solve her queries. This is a bad tax structure where the laws are not simple enough for all the citizens to understand in one go without the help of an expert. An ideal tax structure is where Lucy has to refer to only one book to solve all of her queries relating to all the taxes that she has to comply. The real tax laws cannot be that simple. Obviously, you just can't refer to one book to get your queries solved. But the canon of simplicity just states that tax law should not be very complicated. And so, certainty, convenience, and simplicity were the three canons related to ease and comfort of the taxpayer. The next three are more of a relevance to only the government: productivity, elasticity, and diversity. We'll just look at the three in brief. The canon of productivity states that the tax should be of such a nature as to yield sufficient income to the government to run all of its administrative duties. Canon of elasticity, as the name suggests, is a tax system where the government can increase or decrease the tax burden from time to time and when there's change in revenue demand. So, the tax structure should be elastic. The canon of diversity refers to a tax structure which is kind of outdated in today's world. Whoops! A canon is outdated. Well, you should know that these canons were made 200 years back, and a lot has changed since then. So, canon of diversity basically says that there should be a number of taxes of different varieties so that every class of citizen may be called upon to pay something. Now, this canon might hold true if all the tax structures are very, very simple and absolutely not complicated. But you know how the existing indirect tax structure is laying out. There are a number of taxes to tax every class of citizen, but it's not really reaping any benefit, and that's why we are talking about GST today. So, canon of diversity is not very relevant. In fact, all these three canons of productivity, elasticity, and diversity are not relevant from the point of view of taxpayer because, as you can see, it's the government's point of view. So, we've had a very elaborate discussion on all the 9 canons of taxation because this drives a very important point that even if one of the canon is not met, there is chances of tax evasion. People would not want to pay tax if they feel they are cheated. There's unjust tax. They have too much of complications to deal with, or that the taxes collected are way too higher than their ability to pay. The indirect tax structure does not comply or tick off many of these canons in some way or the other, and that's what GST is trying to fix, especially through the composition scheme. So, going forward, we'll see that comparison, and as we've discussed, 3 of the canons, productivity, elasticity, and diversity, are of no relevance to the taxpayer. We'll not be dealing with them anymore. We'll only check the first 6 of equality, economy, expedience, certainty, convenience, and simplicity.